Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Layman's Lounge. This is the first episode that we had a guest on the spin-off series, and also this is the first time that I had three people on our show. So, Michael, welcome to Method Ministries and also the Layman's Lounge.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to this discussion, and really excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're going to talk about witchcraft today. So, one, it may sound a little bit, abrupt. Well, that's okay. It should be, but why are we going to talk about that today, Wes? Because you and Michael are doing a self-publishing, I guess like Spule, going on.
Yeah, I won't say too much. I don't know how much we want to say, but there's a lot of great works out there. We are not the first to think about this. We are not the first people that have encountered spiritual realities and are trying to come to grips with how should we think about them? How as Christians should we address them? So Michael's spearheading some great work. I'll maybe pass it to him for how much he wants to say to really bring some of what our spiritual forefathers who did great work, bring that back out and get it out in the public consciousness.
And Michael, do you want to introduce yourself, for the audience?
Yeah, sure. I'm Michael and Michael Belch, and I live in the same town as Wes. We go to the same church, and I teach for an online classical school. My family and I did 6 years serving in Taiwan, and now we are committed to winning back America. So we did mission work there, and so one of the questions I asked myself was, why aren't we doing the same kind of intentional work to reach the culture in America as Christians? And not to say not all of them are not, but a lot of us are just kind of getting by. So I'm excited to be back and working alongside Wes and even today, you, Lucas, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Do you guys sit, I'm in the same pew section?
We have our own pew actually.
No, he's in the back with the stroller section.
Wes takes the high seat.
Yeah.
Michael takes the low seat.
We ask people to bow when we come into church. Oh, if you could just pay homage.
Deacon of the Month Club.
Michael, I don't think I've ever asked you, but in Taiwan, thinking spiritually, I know you've mentioned some of the dynamics of Eastern thinking before. What were some of the dynamics as it related spiritually, just in what was common in the culture? Because Taiwan is more Western than maybe you would have in actual like mainland Asia, correct?
It is more Western,
in some ways.
The vice president of the country went to the annual Matsu, which is the sea goddess pilgrimage. Like politician, it was just unthinkable. Like 7-Eleven burns offerings outside of the 7-Eleven on the month when you burn offerings to the ghosts and to the dead. I mean, it is. Even though they're Western and their attempt to appeal to Western markets and their economy and things like that, it's almost unthinkable not to still use the ancestor worship and the pagan practices. I mean, it's as common as breathing. There's no question about Buddhist nationalism. When the vice president goes out and does these pilgrimages and the marches and the politicians and the businesses, it is as common as breathing. So one of the things that I learned there was the faith of the Taiwanese people is not a systematized faith. It's not written down in a book. What you do is what you believe, and you burn offerings and you take fruit to the temple and you give money to the temple and you get a priest to bless your business or your car or your marriage, and you blow up firecrackers to scare away evil spirits. They don't know necessarily what they believe. They know what they do. And what they do is largely appeasing and interacting with the spiritual world to gain favor or prevent calamity.
Got it. And you said it was John Perkins, right? That's who wrote work on it. And wasn't it like kind of like didn't somebody, Wes, you say kind of just like hid that section of his work, like didn't want to publish it?
Well, a big part of some of the Puritans and why there should hopefully be publishers that are going back in and publishing these works, not just from something Banner of Truth has done or Reformation Heritage Books, is it would appear that they've been selectively edited over the years. We don't know to what degree, but apparently it's very common knowledge in the industry that the editors will go through and there'll be things maybe on family or politics or even potentially witchcraft and paganism like we're talking about now. They're kind of unsensible to our modern ears, the way we talk about them. And so they've been edited, and they've been edited not to where, hey, this part has been excised, you can read this online, just paragraphs or pages completely taken out. So when we read the Puritans who have dealt with this stuff, they've dealt with, I think, of feminism, modesty, questions of the family, politics, the role of the civil magistrate. They dealt with all of these things, but we may only be getting a partial picture of what all they wrote about. The more full picture of how they thought about it may be robust, may have some things that are, again, they don't fit our modern sensibilities, but they're very helpful. And so the point is, that's why we're trying to get into some of these older works. What were they talking about then? And let's bring it forward without any of our commentary, without any of editing for modern ears or modern eyes, and say, this is how they thought about it, this is how they were addressing it, and this is what they did.
And it was and this is interesting too to talk about, because as I said before, paganism is on the rise in America. Well, pagans bring witches, and even looking back at my in the churches that I've been in, like there was this one Acts 29 church that I went to, and like you have like kind of like small traces of witchcraft going on, like the enneagram, if I'm saying that right.
Yep,
Like I'm sure that's like kind of like all related to it, and then like the girls get in on it, and I guess like feminism today, or like like the modern witches, because it has to do with like empowerment and stuff like that, and like people say, oh, like I'm really into like spirituality, and you can even see this with things like abortion. Like people are like, oh, like this is abortion is like a sacrifice, or you can make it like your own kind of ritual, and like you can see these things like kind of like all connecting, where it's like you look at, okay, witchcraft is still a reality today, and then once you see that, you can kind of see, oh yeah, you know what, there's little traces over here and there, and there's even some traces in the church as well.
Punt it to Michael for noting how feminism and witchcraft connect. But I remember just the pastor at that church, his wife, she did like an essential oils blend called Courage, and was advertising and trying to sell it to the ladies. Like, when I have a tough day, I do this roller ball of essential oils for courage. Now, that is, of course, not witchcraft, and she was a pastor's wife. But right there is kind of a new age, energetic, this is what gets to my spiritual part of me. This is what courage. Whoa. No, our strength, our encouragement, everything we need does not come from essential oils and this, that, or the other. We need to be thinking, if we're thinking spiritually, especially, courage of the soul, facing the day, that's not essential oils. Don't be going to that, or breathing or something else.
Wasn't that funny though? Because isn't like essential oils kind of associated with like the Christian soccer mom a little bit?
It is, and that's how it sneaks in.
Would you say like that's a connection to like essential oils is connected to this, like, or in a very small sense maybe?
I think there's a lot of things that seem chic. They seem kind of hip and trendy. Whether it's it's not as common now, but it still is fairly common. But having a psychic and or seeking aura cleanses, you can buy those on Etsy now, and to talk about your aura. And I think the essential oils, a lot of us and women, I think it's fair to say, tend to be a little bit more following the trends and the fashions, because a lot of their status is in group status and relating to the rest of the group. And so if something is fashionable or trendy, even among Christian women, it can be this way with, I'm reading this blog, I'm reading this book, good things too. But I think that what we in the West have forgotten is that we are a fusion of spirit and body. And there are spiritual realities that we don't often give a lot of credit to in our very materialistic scientific world. So, for instance, the essential oil is not necessarily witchcraft and summoning a spirit and witch of Endor territory, but I think it can put us in the position where we are embracing and just flirting with spiritual realities that are out there. And I don't know how it works entirely, but some people that I've listened to have said that the more you kind of flirt with this, the more it's kind of like a campfire on a dark night, where the bigger you build your fire, the more obvious it is to spiritual forces. And obviously, as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit in us, but still just opening and being receptive to. One of the things that I did as I was looking at yoga a little bit was, one of the people was saying that not everyone who does yoga is going to end up becoming a Buddhist and a pagan, but over a period of 4, 5, 6 years, people who stick at it generally lose Christian faith or start to adopt polytheistic principles or beliefs or outlooks, and it just happens slowly over time. So there is a danger there, I think. I'm not going to say essential oils is the Witch of Endor, but I think there is kind of a slide into those perspectives.
I like that a lot. The pagan principles or the polytheistic principles, because that's so true. It's like you get little tidbits of it, streaming into your thought. And again, like you do see this a little bit in the church if you just kind of open up like your eyes a little bit to this.
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to say,
you're going to talk about
that bonfire illustration. You hear stories of people messing with is it lucid dreaming and astral projection?
Yeah.
So there are these ideas where you take your spirit and can go out of your body, or when you dream, the body sleeps and you begin to walk. And as you read the stories, this was more a couple of years ago that I was just more interested in this. But as you read the stories, they would start out and it would be a good experience. Like they would actually be able to do it. They would let their body fall asleep, then be dreaming, realize they were dreaming, be able to walk around and navigate. There certainly is a sense where that's probably a spiritual world. But what always happened in time was they would do it and they would be exploring and they would encounter something and it would all turn dark so fast. So it's not like the spiritual world, I used this term before, is ex opere operato. It works because it works. It's not mechanical. Like my keyboard, I press a button, a response happens if everything's correct. Spiritual world isn't like that. It can be like a bonfire. It's an organic connection that we have to the spiritual world. And that's why Paul says, he uses that word pharmakoi, I believe is what he uses in Corinthians. Exactly. He says, don't mess with it. For this time now, until you have a resurrected body, till the spiritual inherits the natural, you are not navigated to equip this realm. Don't mess with it. Don't go there. And people get deceived and they'll do it once or twice, or I took acid, I didn't have a bad time. And then they do it a little more and you become that raging bonfire that attracts attention. And some people never recover. They're like, I feel like I have a spiritual leech. I have spiritual this, I have spiritual that I might never come back from.
I remember actually growing up as a kid and my sister brought into our house, I forget what it was. I want to say like tarot cards or something like that. And that actually did, once she brought that in, we started having stuff happening like in our house. Like I'm not going to go into too much detail, but like you would have things like, you would see stuff, hear stuff, and you have like doors like opening and closing. And I always tell people like, don't mess with this stuff. Like even unbelievers, get into this and like, don't mess with this stuff. Like this stuff does have an effect. And there's a reason why God says this too. And even like talking about like witchcraft, like you go through like the Old Testament, Genesis 1-11, like it seems like very, mythological. Well, why? Because spiritual realities are true, like Paul in Ephesians 6, right? We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Well, then who do we wrestle against, Paul? Well, spiritual forces of darkness. Like that's who, we're up against. And also, I'm even thinking of like Exodus, where it's like Moses was going and, to like the Pharaoh, and then they had their magicians and they were mimicking everything that God was doing. And it doesn't try to like say like, this wasn't real, but it was just a real actual reality that was happening.
Yep. It's interesting that when you consider astrology, many distinct, like not connected that we would think of historically, cultures have had a version of astrology. The Native Americans had it, the Greeks had their own, the Persians had their own, the Indians had their own, the Chinese had their own, and they were all somewhat distinct. And I think what it tells us is sometimes what people who when they want to do tarot cards or they want to do astrology or something like that, like there is something there. There is something there that people over centuries have tapped into. And to Wes's point, God has said, don't go there. It is, first of all, it's dangerous to you, but second of all, it's an abuse. Like, so astrology is an attempt to not observe the cosmos and take in data and understand. It's an attempt to read past the data. It's an attempt to foretell, to project, and to look into nature to find something that only God knows, which is the future, which is, what is going to happen. And so these things, they are dangerous to us because there are spiritual realities out there, but they are also an abuse of what God has called nature to be. It is to testify to him, and it is something that we can study. And someone said it well, the difference is between astrology and astronomy, alchemy and chemistry. One is we observe and use the natural world, and one is we twist it to try and steal God's role from him of knowing the secret things and the future things.
Yeah. So, how did the Puritans understand this then? Like, and what was their approach to witchcraft?
They, at least William Perkins, and then Wes, who was the other one? The other book that we decided not to go with, where he
Samuel
investigated a whole
Rutherford.
bunch of Samuel Rutherford. Was it
Joel-
Samuel
Joel
Rutherford who
Osteen?
investigated Salem witch trials?
I think it was. So he wrote a brief.
It was Cotton Mather. It was Cotton Mather.
There we go. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, he wrote like a brief treatise on it, and then gave like the full history
Yep.
of the investigation.
Cotton Mather thought there was a lot of legitimacy to what was going on in around the witchcraft of Salem, and their result was he and William Perkins largely condemned it. They said it's dangerous, it needs to be, and Cotton Mather sided in a lot of the cases with the convictions and the fact that the Puritans, what's the word I'm looking for, exposed it and dealt with it. Now, a lot of the other Puritans, and interestingly, what happened was during this time, Massachusetts had lost its charter. And so they actually had no legal standing to even conduct some of these trials. And so this happened during a window when Massachusetts had sent an emissary back to England to request a renewal of the charter. And when that came back, it was the civil ruler who came in and said, this is out of control, we're going to quash it. But I think a lot of the Puritan pastors really did feel like it was a, DEFCON 3 level threat, and it was dark spiritual forces, and it needed to be dealt with a very strong hand.
Yeah. And it maybe highlights, I think we've talked about this before, Lucas, the Puritans had, it would appear to me, and maybe you can push back.
It would appear to Puritan.
They appeared to have a little bit too much introspection, as in, so something would happen maybe, or would go on, and there would maybe a little bit too much, did I do this, or is there something going on outside the camp? So if I remember the Salem witch trials correctly, I believe there was children that were getting sick and dying. So there's these different things happening, and some of it at the level that I understand it was feeling a need to explain it. Like, this is happening, this tragedy has struck. Is there something evil going on? Well, this is concerning. Someone has reported so and so. And it's so tough with spiritual matters not to see a demon behind every bush and not to be head in the sand. Almost all of us will probably lean towards one dish or the other. Be a little too materialistic. Yeah, spirits are out there, demons are out there, but practically, functionally, we never encounter them. But there is the whole charismatic side where, oh my goodness, you're sick. That's a demon, that's a sickness, that's an affliction. And walking that narrow road between the two of them, it's tough. But the point is, not being in that situation when people are dying, again, you're without a charter, it's very easy to cast judgment. But I mean, imagine being in a town, there's sickness going on, God's promise, like he says in his law, you shall not suffer a witch to live. You say, yeah, we really have some suspicions. Again, you do a fair trial, fair court, there's evidence presented, but it makes sense that they lean towards the actions that they did because this is so serious.
Yeah. That reminds me of like people today, who are like, oh, like I'm not getting a job, or, I'm doing bad in my, homework, and they, I got to rebuke this demon or rebuke the devil. And it's like, dude, it's like, like, unless you're Apostle Paul, I doubt the devil is just trying to wreck your grades in school, and somehow that's like doing damage to the kingdom of Christ over here. So
Right.
like, you can be too spiritual, or like, what do they say? Like, rebuke in the name of, or like, I rebuke in the name of Jesus and the power of the blood, as if the power of the blood will cover you from like, just common like mishaps like this. Like I forgot something at the grocery store. Oh, the devil's attacking me today.
Right. My grades are bad. No, you didn't study. That's why your grades are bad.
Yeah, because like it's like take some responsibility for yourself. But more in line with this conversation, that doesn't mean that we just go down the materialistic route where none of it is spiritual, because a lot of it is spiritual. It doesn't have to be the devil attacking you, but it could be a demon attacking you in various ways. Like, I just wouldn't tie it into like, kind of like average day stuff where it's like, again, like, my grades are bad. The devil's attacking me and I'm oppressed now.
Right. I think one of the things to keep in mind here is, I think especially for Christians, what we tend to fall into is what everyone falls into, and that is we want shortcuts. And Paul said, but God says it's one of the immutable laws of the universe. I think you reap what you sow. And that's why grace is grace, right? We don't get what we sow in sin. But apart from that, you reap what you sow. And what a lot of witchcraft is, or even tarot cards, or all of these things, is an attempt to achieve some sort of advantage through means outside of what God has said, right? And it's a reluctance to submit to the hand of God's providence, where sometimes God deals us a tragedy or a blow or a setback. And his command, first of all, is trust me. That's why prayer is different than chants and meditations. Prayer centers us back on the true and living God. It reminds us what is true, and it is an act of submitting to him. Chants and mantras and these sorts of things are an act of elevating the self. In yoga, it's elevating yourself even outside of the plane of existence. And so the true Christian spiritual disciplines are almost the exact opposite of what we see in pagan religions and in witchcraft, where one is a lowering yourself to truth and then trusting God. The other is an elevating self outside of yourself. And it's making yourself a god or a goddess in many cases, or it's tapping into those powers. But once the Christian prays, he then submits to how God has commanded him to live. Okay, my business failed. What am I going to do? First of all, I'm going to trust. Second of all, I'm going to work, and I'm going to continue to work hard as unto the Lord. The pagan says, I've got to do this ritual or this chant. I've got to bring these energies or attract these spirits of fortune, and that's going to be what gives me prosperity. And so lots there, but Christian discipline submits us to truth of God, and it meditates in the proper way on what God has said. And paganism and witchcraft skirts around that and tries to raise us beyond our status.
And all that sounds very feminine. Like, if you just listen to that whole thing, which I agree with too. And that's why, I kind of want
the witchcraft part, not the prayer part. Prayer is godly and strong. The witchcraft and paganism and the self is
only feminine people pray. We get the results.
Not the takeaway.
But I do want to, go into this more. So, like, how does feminism today play into this topic? And is it kind of like, maybe not like a 1-to-1 correlation, but can you see again like those principles, and does it have a stronger principle than other things would, like kind of like essential oils and whatnot?
I'll read you a quote from the Atlantic magazine, which is not a bastion of truth and
it's better than
a publication of Hillsdale College
thinking. But here we go. This says, in the U.S., mainstream interest in witches has occasionally waned, but mostly waxed, usually in tandem with the rise of feminism and the plummeting of trust in establishment ideas. In the 19th century, as transcendentalism and the women's suffrage movement took hold, witches enjoyed the beginning of a rebranding, from wicked devil worshippers to intuitive wise women. Woodstock and second wave feminism were a boon for witches, whose popularity spiked again following the Anita Hill hearings in the 90s. And that article in the Atlantic and several others that I looked at, they draw an indistinguishable link between the rise of feminism, even in the first wave, and the rise of in witchcraft, but also in the way that it has changed. Previously, witchcraft was viewed as dark, evil. You don't speak about it. And with the elevation of feminism and it being no longer taboo for women to exert themselves in public and to take some of the roles that are for men, also along with that, the idea of witchcraft became slowly seen as more and more popular, and not even popular, but positive, to the point where now it's we have 1.5 million confessed witches in America now. And it's very, if someone says, oh, I'm a witch, you're like, oh, that's so cool. And not like, let's get the stakes out and the bonfires.
Yeah, that's so true. Back then, like you were, put it to death. Now it's like, oh, like you're empowered and you go girl and slay queen and all that.
And men and women's tendency will be to be deceived. So men, typically speaking, when they're doing wrong, they would actually acknowledge it. Hey, you're looking at this. Is it wrong? Yeah, it is. You were angry when you got home. Is that wrong? Yes, it is. For women, on the other hand, for Eve, like, well, no, this is pleasing to the eyes. women will oftentimes do something. Well, I'm transitioning my child. This is the most loving thing. Truly, genuinely thinking, I'm doing something that's good. I'm benefiting myself. I'm benefiting other people around me. Men oftentimes have their eyes wide open. I remember seeing interviews of former Satanists, and they were like, oh yeah, I was the devil's henchman. But for women, again, not all, but many, well, no, this is what I do to protect my reproductive rights. This is what I do to protect my children. This is what I do to establish and validate my true self. And so we have to be aware that women, especially, the reason this will play on them is because it's subtle. We're talking about these things because they're subtle. Well, it's just astrology. It's just my sign. Oh, I have a tendency to speak out or be loud. Very subtly woven within there are pagan assumptions versus men, not as much represented. Certainly some deceived, but men are much more so. Yeah, they're more impulsive, just maybe violent or lustful compared to the way women would tend to sin.
And isn't it ironic too, is that as Christianity declines in this country, it wouldn't be like the secular vision where it's like, oh, now we're just like, nobody's kind of religious. Instead, what do you see? Oh, paganism is on the rise. Oh, more witches are coming on, the scene. Well, why is that? Well, could it be, what the Bible says is true? Like there are spiritual realities, spiritual forces, out there. Because again, the atheists would say, if Christianity goes away, that's one win for us. Now we can just be more secular. Well, Christianity has dwindled. What do you have? Oh, more pagans on the scene, more witches now, going on. Well, why? Because again, the Bible talks about these things. So this is like a proof of Christianity over here.
Mm-hmm. My running theory really is that Christianity purged the West. So you have,
I remember you said that.
There's many ways. It almost seems like darkness in the Old Testament. So you have the flood. So people are wicked. The flood happens. It cleanses it. Peter says the world that was washed away in judgment. The wickedness builds up again to the point where Jesus is seen. Even his covenant people in their covenant land is overrun by demons and spirits.
Yeah.
And all of that even culminates. Paul uses multiple times this phrase, at the right time and in the fullness of time. It's almost like all of human history had gotten darker and darker and darker. And even the covenant people of God have been overrun till the cross, where he breaks the captor's bounds, where he conquers death. And from there, from out of the cross, Christianity begins pushing back the darkness. So that America, the new lands, when they arrived here, you hear like Native Americans tell stories about skinwalkers, these demons that are 8 foot tall that flay their victims. Now, maybe these experienced hunters mistook coyotes for 8 foot tall skinwalkers, or maybe demons really lived here and Christianity arrived, put down the flag, and said no more. But as Christianity goes out, Joel Webben, he's likened it to a ship leaving the harbor. As the ship leaves the harbor, there's going to be another ship coming back in. So those spirits that Christianity purged, they're going to come back. They may have been pushed to the mountains or to dry. Jesus describes it as dry and waterless places. But when you leave now the house in order, fully swept and empty, he's going to bring, Jesus describes, 7 more demons like himself to come inhabit it. And at a grand scale, I mean, certainly Europe, France just enshrined the right to abortion in their constitution.
In their constitution.
Europe is experiencing this. They purged the strong gods, the demons, the Norse gods, Norse mythology. I mean, the Vikings and the Norse, they were violent people, extremely violent. Christianity purged that, purged the US or the United States and America, the new land. But as Christianity leaves and recedes, that's what's going to be coming back, I think.
And you can track
it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Lucas.
I was going to say, like, you can track all that perfectly with Saul. So Saul, when he was doing good, he cast out all the witches. Then he fell, and then what happened? He went to a witch. So there was this decline serving God. Incline serving God, and then this decline. And then what happened? You went to getting out, telling all the witches, okay, you got to leave, to then, okay, I'm going to go find a witch and bring her back in here. And that's exactly what is happening with America right now. It's like, why is paganism on the rise? Because Christianity is on the decline.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is that we say, how does this happen? This happens through practical means. So for instance, most major cities in America through the 1800s had laws on their books that prohibited fortune telling, basically astrology, right? And actually, in a number of cases that were brought through the 1800s and even the early 1900s, courts upheld the ban on fortune telling. So, for instance, I think it's interesting. Davis versus Ohio was the Ohio State Supreme Court. The court says this: liberty of speech is not a license to speak anything that one pleases, freed from all criminal or civil responsibility. And then there was another case where it said a party's religious belief cannot be accepted as a justification for his committing an overt act of criminal law by the land. But then into the mid 1900s and then the late like in 1998 actually was one of the big cases that allowed public fortune telling to be accepted legally. What happened was people said, well, this is just superstition, or we have no right to judge what religion someone practices in public. And the freedom of speech was initially upheld. No, you can't. The freedom of speech does not mean you can just do whatever you want in public. To freedom of speech now protects fortune tellers and tarot card readers. And previously these things were banned. And when you remove the bans, this is why I've moved in the direction I have theologically. When you remove this in your life, if you have a filter on your computer that will keep you from watching certain things, great, largely smooth sailing. You take off the filter, maybe a week or two, you're fine. And then 1 week you're under a lot of stress, you're tempted, whatever, eventually it's going to slip. The bans are there so that you don't have to fight that battle in some ways. And as we remove the cultural, legal, and religious bans that hedge and protect against these pagan practices, obviously they're going to come in. And like Wes said, they're going to come in stronger. And not only are they going to come in stronger, but we are not as equipped to deal with them as our forefathers were, who lived in that reality and had experience with it.
Well, and we don't think like this either, because like if you look at like, the apologetic world, like they want to very, just take everything and just kind of like make it more appealing and modernize. Oh, the flood wasn't global, it was local. Oh, faith and reason works hand in hand. Oh, Genesis isn't history. Well, if you do that's going to have consequences where now it's everything, is going to be modernized, where like, witchcraft would just be like something that, you shouldn't practice. Not that there's a real power, real entity behind that. And there is a real power and an entity behind that. And Christianity is, from day one against that. And, God's, like look at the 10 Commandments, right? It was all about worshiping God and not worshiping, the other gods and deities. God knows there's a real presence behind that.
Yeah. There's an aspect of paganism, witchcraft that we have to hit on, and that's how it's always implicated and always involved with some type of sexual perversion. So in the Old Testament, whenever they would turn to Baal or they would start to worship or cast their children to Molech, all of those are intimately tied with some type of sexual function, the results of sex being children, to sterilizing it. Even now you see a move from the Church of Satan, literally called the Synagogue of Satan or the Church of Satan, to make abortion a protected religious procedure so that they're able to do this. Over and over again, when you get to witchcraft, you get to paganism, they refuse to honor the true design that God has for human sexuality, for men and for women. It subverts it and then takes the children and casts them into the fire. This just came to me as we were talking. Modern birth control in the hormonal form, a pharmakia, a pharmaceutical concoction, terribly unhealthy for women, and designed to what? Make you infertile. Designed for the exact same thing that all those Old Testament gods wanted to. You to be infertile, your crops to fail, your home to fail. That's all that they want to do. You even have Gerhardus Voss, he draws this contrast. One of the trees, the Asherah pole, when they would worship in front of it, that tree was stripped of all its branches. So instead of bearing fruit and being green and having vines and branches fully fleshed out and meeting its function, it was stripped sterile of everything that made it have life. That's pagan religion versus Christianity, these right uses, their proper places, and putting sex in its context of marriage.
But see, like you'll never hear that talked about in church, right? And especially if you want to bring up birth control and how it harms women in church, churches. I guarantee you, like a church split is going to happen if that conversation or that sermon gets preached. People are going to have issues, with that. But again, like even that, you can kind of see how this has even affected, thinking. I'm not saying like the church entirely, but you can see kind of principles where again, like you can see these streams of thought, like birth control, like infertility, and then it goes back to pagan gods, child sacrifice. Like even if you look at like abortion too, it's like what when the world does, if you take their whole philosophy of abortion, what does Satan have to do with this? because they're preaching, oh, this is just about women's rights and secular, and getting rid of religion. Okay, so why are you sacrificing this to Satan? Why are you putting a Christian?
Does the Church of Satan care?
Yeah, like why are you putting Satan, who was created by God? It's in the scriptures, so that is 100% from the Bible. You're telling me that this is about women's rights, and we're going to get rid of religion and just be empowered. So why are you bringing Satan into this? What does he have to do with this? Well, surprised, it's it's kind of like that meme, like let's see who's behind this mask. Oh, it's Satan. Satan's behind the mask. Surprise! Genesis 1-11.
Right. Because evil can never.
There's a direct link.
Something else.
Go ahead.
It only ever perverts what's good. Go ahead.
There's a direct link between, in some of the research I was doing for that other article that I wrote. As much as there's a link between feminism, the rise of feminism, and the rise of witchcraft in the West and in America in particular, we're starting to see the same trend between the movements for quote unquote sexual minority rights. I'm not saying everyone out marching at a pride parade is a witch or a pagan, but they're very friendly. They hold hands. I mean, metaphorically, and they're very welcoming the one of the other. And that's because fundamentally, feminism and LGBTQ issues and witchcraft are an attempt to throw off the hierarchy and the rules that God has given us. And so I think unless we turn, the more the LGBTQ mood and moment rises and solidifies, the more we're going to see a connection to witchcraft rising and becoming more and more common and popular too.
And that's the end game of all this too. Satan, witchcraft, like, there has to be an end game. There is, because like, even if you get their wants, mankind naturally wants to worship something higher than themselves. Right. And you're gonna realize this whole entire time there was a power behind this. So it's not just gonna let you be neutral. It's gonna bring you all towards, again, Satan, and that's the end game.
Well, even just this week, I believe it was in Missouri, there was a bill slated to some type of banning of pride drag shows or something. It wasn't even something crazy. And I believe an individual, I've definitely seen the pictures, dressed as a demon, showed up. Yeah. They were all dressed in blue or whatever. Dressed up as a demon, came in to testify against the bill. The two of them are hand in hand, locked together.
They're taking they're taking that straight from the Bible again. Like, who is Satan? Atheism doesn't have a Satan. Like, you have streams of thought of evil beings, but you go back to the Bible. They're they're telling you right there, this is a war of God versus Satan, and they're embodying it. And again, you can see this, witchcraft, abortion, kind of streams of thoughts with, like infertility, with the pill with women, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And people who get into this stuff, who see the spiritual reality behind it, I think sometimes they believe that they are on the side of that spiritual force. They might not know it's Satan or some pagan god, but they think I'm on that power's side. And what we fail to recommend is that Satan loves no one. He does not love you because you are on his side and worshiping him or doing his bidding. In fact, he knows that you are a coward and ineffective. And when it comes time to really, if he wants to really put someone through the ringer, it's going to be that person, because he already knows you're defenseless. You're already given over. There's no compassion. There's no kindness. There's no sense of like, well, at least that side is going to take care of me and keep my business going, my family. No, like, there's no regard from the spiritual dark, the pagan demonic world towards humans. They want, like you say, Lucas, the end game is death, destruction. It is to crush flourishing and human productivity, and to turn the order that God has created completely on its head.
Yeah. When you hear the stories, I think probably the most godless regime we've ever seen has been communism. When you read the stories of the Bolsheviks, their march to Germany, I remember just listening to a podcast, and I would have to pause it every 15 minutes to be like, that's enough for today, because they were so violent and so cruel. I don't even want to just describe it in case there's children listening. But the level of, like you said, inhuman indifference to the absolute suffering and the pain of other people, that's what you get on that side.
Yeah.
It's Christ or Satan. He who is not with me is against me, or he who is not against me is for me. Jesus draws every human being, picks one of two sides, and that other side is completely indifferent, and or in fact, maybe even interested in your suffering. Your suffering is the point. So don't make a deal with the devil, so to speak. Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, is that, if and I've been saying this a couple of years, if you take the message of social justice where, there's this oppressor and there's this patriarchal evil guy, you can apply that perfectly to Satan. You can say Satan is the oppressed, the one who's oppressed by the evil patriarchal God. And you see people using this actually. Satan is a good guy. He was rebelling, he was on our side, trying to free us. So again, social justice, that everything that they're telling you, there are principles there, and the end game leads to the worship of Satan. And that's why even too, like we're talking about like paganism. Well, Satanism is on the rise. Now they're bringing Satan into LGBT and abortions. Why? That's been the whole entire spiel the whole time. That's the end game, the worship of Satan.
And to bring it full circle to what we were talking about earlier, Christians especially, I think, we kind of scoff at the idea that I'm not going to end up being a demon worshiper. I just do the yoga. I just, I got my palm read. It was just kind of fun. We fall incrementally. We fall in steps, and we slide into descent, and then it's slow and slow and slow until it's fast, right? And so it's a warning that we see. We can look historically. We can see the death of the West being given over to paganism again. But it's a warning for the individual as well. Like, just don't mess with it. And we are tempted to think, oh, it's very legalistic. Say I can't, go to the yoga studio and do the yoga, or I can't check my sign every day. That's very legalistic of you. No, this is for your protection. And we want you to flourish. We want you to know Christ. We don't want there to be any distractions. If anything, it is the sort of hindrance that we're commanded to cast off in Hebrews 12, right? It's holding us back. But worst case, it could be something that leads you into apostasy or some sort of, really, really dark and not scary. I'm not scared of this sort of thing, but harmful situation.
Just to clarify, like, would you say then to Michael that you should kind of stay away from like things like yoga, and is there anything else that you should stay away from that could be, again, like that just incremental slide towards, the embodiment of this?
Yeah, I would say, yoga means to yoke oneself like an oxen.
I heard
you are
that,
trying to yoke your body and mind so that, and get this, so that the energy from the lower level, which is the serpent energy, that's what it is. The serpent energy can rise through the regions of your body to meet your crown. And when the serpent energy reaches your crown, then the god Shiva mates with it.
They say that
you are freed from the self. Yes.
Really?
It is the serpent energy. Yes.
Wow.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like, we don't understand. There's another phrase with yoga. Hinduism without yoga is nothing, and yoga without Hinduism is nothing. And so the stretching, good, probably beneficial, although some of it is hard on your body. But when you go to a yoga studio, most of the people leading those are actually trained. When you're contorted, they're putting phrases and mantras and chants into your mind that are designed to remove you from your senses. Now, again, most people who go to a yoga studio probably not going to necessarily fall into that, but there is a danger that over time, they've been trained with what to say when you're in certain positions, when your mind is distracted or blank or empty. There is the idea that pagan beliefs, this is a pagan worship service, was what yoga was designed to be, to connect with the Brahman. And the idea that that's not in some way being forced on you as you sit in your yoga studio and say these things and do these poses is really naive.
Wow. Yeah.
You said related to yoga and also related to we never decline just all at once. Like I did one thing and it all happened all at once. But 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is so clear Bad company corrupts good morals.
Yeah.
And it's almost out of context that he'd say that. He's like talking about the resurrection. He's talking about the dead, but he makes this as a throwaway comment. Bad companies corrupt good morals. And of the people I've seen that have slowly decayed into apostasy, it was the circle of friends that they surrounded themselves with, the type of information that they were imbibing. Again, not over like 6 months. Like I had a good friend for 6 months. I completely just lost my faith in everything. But over years, they surrounded themselves with those kind of people. They didn't renew their minds with the word. They weren't surrounded with the saints, addressing one another to guard our hearts against evil. And they did that. And as you said earlier, 4 or 5, 6 years go on. Oh, well, we don't want to put God in the box. Well, we wouldn't want to say, simply that he's just bound by this book. God is in all of us. Panentheism. God is in all and with all. That's how it happens. And of course, the first year, the first 2 years, we mentioned astral projection. We mentioned these other hallucinogenics. You do them a couple times and truly nothing necessarily changes. Some of that's probably in God's mercy. But once you're so far down the road, you find yourself, Pilgrim's Progress uses the picture of the man locked in the cage where repentance is impossible. Esau sought repentance with great tears. It was actually locked away from him because he spent years hardening his heart against the repentance that he needed.
And I was even thinking of like worship today is very mystical. What they call, worship, darkly atmosphere, band on stage. Everybody has their hand, their eyes closed, their hands up. It's very, mystical. Well, that's a Christian, what that is Christian mysticism. And, where does that come from? This deep spirituality that you've been taught is good, empowerment, slay queen, like, I'm going to exalt myself, again, like that serpent energy. I'm not saying like they're directly, drawing from that, but it's implicit. And again, like you said, Michael, too, that, that principle is there and you can see it. Yeah. I think in some ways this has like affected the church.
Yeah.
I want to give one, you asked about some practicals of where people are falling into it. The one, for us, we think of, someone bought this thing on Etsy but really for our young people and our young women, especially, TikTok is destroying our daughters in many ways. So first of all, get your kids off TikTok. Second of all, take your smartphone away from your kids. But there is a hashtag on TikTok called Witch Talk that's been interacted with over 20 billion times. And there are many, many new neo-witch accounts on TikTok where people are just giving advice like, as a witch, what I do is I hang this garlic here and you should try it too in your house, or I put up this, ward here and it works, it helps keep my house happy and blessed. And the modern witchcraft that our daughters are being tempted with largely is through social media platforms, but primarily it's really, really rampant on TikTok.
Yeah, that's true. I heard of stuff like that happening. Do you guys have anything final to add before we close out this episode?
I would say this is why preaching is important. There's a spiritual dynamic to preaching. So a pastor, when he speaks on the Lord's Day as the Lord's mouthpiece, Revelation has that image of the candles and that the sword comes through the mouth of Christ, and the minister is putting that forward. When he does that, he certainly addresses human beings and attendees. There's also something spiritual. You mentioned what Paul says, that we wrestle not against just flesh and blood on this physical plane, but against principalities and powers. And good preaching proclaims the triumph of Christ. Christ has defeated all of these principalities and powers that we've discussed, that Christ has triumphed over him, that believers cannot be touched, that believers have the tools. They have the shield of faith, the breastplate of righteousness, the sword, which is the word of God, that believers have the tools to fight against them. So good preaching at some level has to be thought of as a way of pushing back the darkness. So it certainly isn't only preaching, that only preaching is going to fix this, but it's certainly not anything less than good preaching that's going to help turn the corner on some of the darkness we're seeing.
Amen. 100% agree.
My last comment would be, Peter says that we are to sanctify Christ as Lord in our hearts and then be ready to give an answer. And my challenge is to the listener who might be thinking, it really isn't that big of a deal, guys. Like, this stuff is really minor. I'm not seeing demons. And I just want to say that biblical command is to move as far into sanctifying Christ as Lord in your heart, first of all. Cleave to him as much as possible and have what is true and not true what is good and what is bad, what is spiritual, what is allowed for us to touch, physical. Let the Bible and Christ be the one that defines those things. And if there's a question of whether something is permissible or not, take it seriously. Don't just dismiss it out of hand. Think, pray, study the word. The Bible has many, many things to say about these things. And if you have studied it and you have a conviction, I'm going to disagree with you, but that's better than just dismissing it out of hand and saying that's just paranoia.
Yeah, definitely. And, just to go off your point too, Wes, like preaching will either save or destroy a nation. And if you can fix the preachers in this country, I 100% believe you can fix this, this nation. Like, if we can get good, godly preachers, like, Leonard Ravenhill's, John Wesley's, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and every pulpit, you can get, the light would just shine through this nation and bring revival.
Yeah.
And everything. Yeah.
Amen.
Well, yeah, Michael, thanks for coming on. Maybe, Wes and I will let you come back again for another time.
We'll have to find an issue we both agree, and then when you don't, we'll gang up on you.
There we go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or you guys can go against me, 2 verse 1.
I was gonna say
on something, guys. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you can please like and share, that helps the algorithm get the video out. Until next time, this has been another episode of the Layman's Lounge, and thanks for tuning in. Take care and God bless.